So why is revenue recognition important on contracts? So the real value here is that your contracts really are going to drive your billing intervals, but oftentimes that doesn't align to your desired revenue recognition. So for example, if you are billing for a quarterly or an annual subscription of some sort, but you want to recognize that revenue every month. So there's a number of revenue recognition methods. I'm going to show you these in the system. I'm grouping them into these sort of three categories. So there's two methods that really allow you to sort of continue to defer or to reverse the deferral. So to either not use revenue recognition in that you're going to reverse it, or that you want it to just sort of go on until you're going to turn it off or trigger some sort of a manual recognition. Then the second way is completely based on manual amounts. So that would require, presumably someone like a cost accountant to go in each month and trigger the amount to be recognized on each specific contract. And then the last method, and probably the most ideal because it's the one with the least amount of intervention, is you would have some sort of a straight line. And then I'm going to show you the various options for prorating. But that will recognize into each fiscal period a certain amount based on some subsettings that you'd look at. So what is the workflow for revenue recognition? Well, you're typically going to set up an initial contract and probably have some sort of a billing event. So in our example here, we've got a 3-month contract. You're going to set up a start date and an end date. That's going to be important. So revenue recognition knows what the time span is. The revenue recognition method is probably going to be determined automatically by the system. I will show you that in a moment. And then you're going to have your billing event, and at that billing event, there's going to be 100% of the credit side of the journal entry is going to go into your deferred revenue account, and then your debit is obviously going to go to accounts receivable and set up that document for your customer to pay upon. And then you're going to just run your revenue recognition process each month as a job. And so if we had a 3-month contract, I just gave you the scenario here that it could split it into thirds. And so it's just going to draw down on that credit sitting in deferred revenue. And each month it's going to bring, that third onto your P&L into the actual revenue account. So very simple scenario that we're showing here, but that just gives you an idea of the workflow. And so the steps that you're going to be doing as a user in the system, obviously the most work at the front to set up the contract, and then just really running that job. And then I am going to show you how to sort of intervene on specific contracts if you need to make adjustments or change the way revenue recognition is behaving. So I did mention that there's these different ways to have the system determine what's called the accrual method. So that's the process it's going to do to generate the arithmetic around that revenue recognition job, presumably each month. And this screen, I'm not going to take you into the system, so I just grabbed the screenshot for this. So this is inside your configuration for the system. I wanted you to be able to see this. If you don't have access to your system administration, you'd have to get some help from a system administrator to set this up. But what you would set up here is how you want the system to determine the accrual method. And you can see all those different intersections. So for each legal entity, and then for the different areas where you can use revenue recognition. So today we're focused on customer contracts, but you can see here in this example that revenue recognition also applies to all sorts of other areas of operation. So sales orders, time and material projects, things like that. But if we're focusing specifically on our row 11 there, we're setting up an accrual method for customer contracts. You could specify a different accrual method to happen based on your set of books, the category of your products, or even a specific product itself. And then you can just decide which of those accrual methods you want the system to use. So that's how the system is going to make its own decision when you set up a product. It's going to check this table and decide which accrual method it should use. So with that, let's go inside ByDesign and have a look around. So I'm going to start with a new contract in the system, and that's under the sales orders. So we're just going to go into contracts, And you can see I've been doing some of my own testing here, a couple of recent contracts, but I'll set up a brand new one for us really quickly. So this may be the type of contract you want to set up, some sort of a maintenance over X number of years or months. And then I mentioned this in the PowerPoint, but what's really important to the system is really knowing the start date and the end date, because that's how it's going to determine how many periods it has to divide this revenue across. So in our case, I'm going to start this on today, just so you can kind of see how the system behaves. And we will go at 3 years. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it at the last day of 2025. And that will allow us to have sort of 36 periods. So think about that. If you are starting a contract, I mean, your business process may be like this would actually start on June 1st, but I want you to see some entries being generated in our current period. So that's why I'm starting it on the 25th, but I'm not ending this in May 3 years out, because that would create 37 periods. So it's up to you how you want to set this up. But this is going to be an important factor. And if you aren't paying attention to this, you're going to have some unexpected results when it generates the revenue recognition. So now we have to put some items into our contract. So we'll put a couple of items in so you can see a bit more of a complex contract. And a contract could have all sorts of things like even products in it. Depending on how the item is set up itself is also going to impact its behavior and revenue recognition. So keeping in mind if you do have inventory and things like that. So I could get into a fairly lengthy conversation into all those options. So for today, I'm just going to focus on some services to help you understand how the revenue recognition is working. But if you have questions around that, feel free to reach out and we can help you understand that. So I'm selling this software maintenance, and I'm going to make it a quantity of 3. And so once again, your quantities, your unit of measure, that's all something that you could set up. So your unit of measure may make more sense if this is actually time. So perhaps instead of each, yours would be set up as year or month or something like that. So I put in 3 at 2,000, so it's going to be $6,000 of revenue we're expecting over the life of this contract. And we'll put in something else, so maybe some HVAC support. And we'll do, once again, it doesn't really matter what my unit of measure, what it matters is my end price. So if we set this up to be, let's say 12,000, once again, 12,000 revenue over the life of the contract. So at this point, I could release this, and that's going to establish the contract in the system. And we've got contract 184. You can see that at the bottom of the screen. And for this particular contract, it's really ready to go as far as revenue recognition is concerned. You could literally start running it right now. But in a real life scenario, chances are there's maybe an invoice that's going to happen first. So why don't we do that? So I'm just going to go in here and create a quick invoice for this contract, and just to show you how the system is going to book it into deferred revenue. So that's our contract 184 for our $18,000. Just generate a super quick invoice here. We'll release that. And invoice 12-2022 has been generated. So lots of ways we can get to that journal entry. Probably easiest for me is I'm just going to go look at my today's postings. So there's my customer invoice. And you can see we have multiple sets of books here. We're going to talk about that a little bit because that may impact you. So as expected, this goes into deferred revenue. So setting up the receivable for your 18,000, you're billing for 3 years upfront. And remember, once again, you don't have to bill upfront. You have invoice scheduling, things like that. That's the other video I mentioned. So You could bill this contract in quarters, whatever, but at this point, it's really separated from the way revenue recognition is going to work. So any billing is always going to go onto your balance sheet as deferred revenue, and then there's going to be a drawdown based on the revenue recognition. So with that, let's go into probably the most important spot that you need to know about. So under your cost and revenue work center, this is where your monthly accountants or your cost accountant is going to go in and manage, monitor, solve any problems with any of your contracts when it has to do with revenue recognition. So once again, this is a cost and revenue work center, and then we're going to go into sales document items. And let me just purposely make a little rookie mistake here. So if I go in and I type in my number 184, you see it's not finding anything because the default here is sales order items. So you have to make sure that this says customer contracts. If you're only using contracts, little tip, you can always go into your queries and you can make your customer contracts your default query when you go into the screen. And then another tip is when you type in that contract number, you're going to need to put an asterisk on the end, because what it's going to bring up is every row of the contract. So it's kind of seeing those, these are sales document items. So that contract was 184, but I need an asterisk, so that wild card is going to trigger it to bring in all of my rows. So these numbers will look familiar to you. This is where the system has kind of told us. So we've got a little general tab that tells us a little bit about the product we've sold, the net value, your sales organization, things like that. You've got a bunch of action buttons at the top here that are going to allow you to do some fairly significant things for changing the way revenue recognition works. And then along here, you have some data tabs that are going to kind of tell you what's going on with this item as far as historical and future proposed revenue recognition. So in our accrual method determination, that screenshot that we had shown you before, in this system, it's telling us that it's going to divide this contract evenly across all of the periods. So you have some other options, but based on this particular method, it's going to book 166.67 into each month. So it's doing that for the 6,000, and for the 12,000, it's going to do 333. If you're a little obsessive like I am, you could do a quick check on that. So if we have our product, our price, our term. So for our software, it was 6,000. Our term was 36. So if we were to say this divided by this is going to give us 166.66. That is what's showing up for this row as far as calculated revenue. So each month the system is going to book that for us. Now, before we talk about changing this, let's see what the entry actually looks like if we were to run it. So running revenue recognition, there's a few different ways that you can do it. So the standard way is you're going to go into cost and revenue, and you're going to see the job here to trigger revenue recognition. You can also trigger it just for the one contract right up here as well. So either way gets you to the same spot. So if you say execute revenue recognition here, you're going to see that it sets up a description for that job, and it says sales document 184. And it assumes it's going to run it in test run. It's also using it's actually defaulted to our IFRS set of books. I'm going to take that out, so we'll run it on both of our sets of books. But one thing to be careful of is it always defaults to the prior period. So in this case, I want to actually run it for period 5. I'm going to generate this job. And I don't know of a way that you can get to that job from here, so we're going to still have to go into our cost revenue recognition there. We could go to our journal entries, and if you're running this in update mode, and you could actually see the journal entries, but for us, we're just going to go in and look at all revenue recognition jobs. So you can see that's the job that was generated, and these are the two different sets of books. So in here, if we want to go and look at this job, you've got a messaging tabs here, so be aware of that if there's any problems with your revenue recognition. You've got the total proposed posting. So the system here is now sees that this contract has come into operation. So it's actually reclassing our deferred revenue into contract liabilities. This is a general ledger determination. So you set up what accounts you want to use here. If you want to have contract liabilities set up as a separate account, the system is supporting that. You could use the same account. It's really up to you. But the important thing is we're going to see our reclass. So our total of our 18,000 contract is really 500. If you want to see it in a bit more detail, we can go to the proposed successfully. And revenue recognition runs off of a bunch of different concepts. So event-based, percentage complete, time and material, but this is a contract, therefore it's time-based. So we'd have to focus on the time-based one. And now you can see what it's actually going to do. So if you're running this job across your entire business and you have dozens or hundreds of contracts, this could be a very lengthy report, and it's going to break out exactly what it's doing inside each contract. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment. I've said a lot, see if there's any questions or chat. So nothing yet. So either people are falling asleep or they totally understand what I'm saying, hopefully the latter. Let me close out of this and show you your options for actually modifying a particular contract, either at the beginning or in play. So if we go back to our contract we're looking at and we have a look at this 184, we do have the ability to modify, and you'll notice because we have multiple sets of books. So I don't know if any of you have multiple sets of books, I'd love to know that. Feel free to let me know in the chat panel. I'm curious if you are running multiple currencies. We do here at VistaView, and so we have some interesting complexity when you're doing multiple currencies and things like that in different sets of books. So in this case, if we wanted to change it, we would have to focus on the books. One thing I will point out is this screen here is only ever going to show you your default set of books. So even though I have the actual same accrual method happening in both these sets of books, but I'll never really be able to get this sneak preview here. I'd have to actually run the test revenue recognition to know it. So for our purposes, I'm going to change it in my default set of books so that you can see the change here. So what is a change that you may want to do? Well, you may want to reassign the accrual method. And so this gives you an idea of the different types of accrual methods that you have based on, or that you could do after you've already had the automation in play. So I could come back here and say that I want this to maybe go based on exact days. If I make that change, you're going to see that the system is going to obviously do, July has more days than June, so it's going to recognize slightly more revenue in those days. Because this contract was triggered for the 25th of May, then we actually only have $39 in here. So if your objective is to have much more precise revenue recognition based on the specific number of days, then this might be the revenue recognition method that you'd want the system to default. Another common one that we see is prorating partial periods. So that means that most of your revenue recognition will be consistent except for the first and last day of the month of the contract. So once again, because the contract started near the end of the month, only $39 here. As far as the end, a tiny difference because I think I didn't select the very last day of the month, but in April, so it's made a tiny adjustment for that. And then it's taken the balance and it's divided it evenly among all of the internal periods. So this is another common way that we will see revenue recognition set up. Once again, you would probably set this as your system default and you wouldn't really be going in and changing this on a per job basis, but that's really up to you. Now, something else I'll mention, why don't we go to one of the other lines? So let's look at our HVAC. We'll do the same thing. We'll look at our US GAAP. What might be a more common one is perhaps you want to reverse it, or you want to sort of turn off revenue recognition for some reason. So I don't know what that business scenario would be. Maybe this contract has been put on hold for some reason. you've got some sort of dispute with your customer, whatever it is, you could use this continue to defer. And so if I choose that option, once again, double check your set of books. I'm doing it on my main books. I'm going to choose OK. And then it's really saying that nothing is going to happen here in this case. So why don't we trigger this revenue recognition again and see what happens with those few changes that we've made. So remember, I can do it from directly from the screen. I can also go in and I can run the job here. So if I go back to my revenue recognition, I could in fact copy that last job. So lots of different ways to generate it. So maybe just make a comment here. And this time I'll actually turn off the test run. So be very conscious of this setting. It's very important, very powerful feature to allow you to run a complex job and look at it without having the journal entry posted. But once you turn this off, you're kind of committed that it's going to be booking it, right? So focusing just on this contract, I'm going to do all sets of books, and I'm going to do period 5, 2022, so I should be good. We'll start this now. And this should run pretty quickly with just one contract, so I'll just give that a second. So I see one question here, can I do a journal entry to deferred revenue, like the GL account? I actually have a comment about that in our helps and hints at the end here. But yeah, thank you for asking that question. So if you look at your general ledger, well, the answer that I would give you is I don't advise it. So deferred revenues, this is the out of the box, best practice setting for setting up a chart of accounts. This is saying only automatic posting allowed. So you want to make sure that you're treating this as a control account. If you do have deferred revenue entries that are completely unrelated to contracts, like something you're doing 100% manual outside of this, think of this as a subledger, I would probably set up a different deferred revenue account to do that. If you do choose to make this account available for posting, then you're running the risk that when you run reports to try and reconcile what the revenue recognition job is doing, it obviously is not aware of any journal entries you do manually into this general ledger account. And if you do trigger some sort of a problem, like let's say you run revenue recognition, in the wrong period or something like that, if there's something that you legitimately can't see a way of correcting directly in the transaction, then you could, if you were going to post it, then I'd recommend you post it as a reversing entry, assuming that revenue recognition run in the following month is going to correct whatever issue was created. So that's probably the advice I give you there. Okay, let's go back and, let's go back to revenue recognition and check that job. So cost and revenue recognition. So this is our true adjusted one. We made most of those changes in the US GAAP books. So let's have a look there. Yeah, so I see one of my colleagues has spoken up. You could do a journal entry voucher, but use a sales document. So that's a variation on a journal entry where you're referencing a specific sales document. So yeah, if you are adjusting sort of the price of the original sales document or something like that, that would be a legitimate way to do it. And then revenue recognition would know that there is an adjustment relating to that contract. Thank you for that, Catherine. So let's have a quick look at what happened here. So if we have a look at this postings, once again, go to our time-based. So you can see that it's doing that 39.18, so the prorate partial period, but for that HVAC one, it's actually not going to do everything. So it's not doing anything. It's just going to leave it sitting here on the balance sheet, not going to recognize any revenue because you've flagged that specific contract to do so. And you can see that we also flagged that only on that one set of books. So this is where, if you do have different governance in different countries and you need to recognize revenue differently in different regions, having a second set of books can be very useful, because perhaps for IFRS you do want to recognize that revenue. And so you can see here that it is now drawing down on our 12,000. It's recognizing 333 this month based on the even period method. Okay, I said a lot there. Trying to think if there's any other job scenarios. Maybe just to pop back into the continue to defer, let me quickly show you the manual option. So if we go back to our contract and we do something, okay, let's bring up our same contract again. Let's actually look into our US set of books here, change this accrual method, because there is also the manual one, which could be useful if there's some sort of situation where the math to do the revenue recognition is just not available inside the system. So maybe there is some sort of project happening outside of this and you need some percentage complete understanding, then you could decide that we're going to always recognize it based on manual input. So then there is some ownership with doing it this way, right? So we'll do that in our US GAAP books. And once I've enabled that, you can see that it's sort of dropped off. It's showing us also, I didn't point this out before, but now that we've actually ran this in production, not in test mode, you can see that the system is already recognized $39 in this books for this item. If we go down to that HVAC one and our US books, oh, this is where we turned it off, continue to defer, so we're not seeing anything. So we'll go back to this one. And now here's the extra step. So if you want to manually recognize it, you're going to have to put in some sort of percentage complete or some amount. So I can go in here for this manual amount and I can add a row and I can literally say that for the month of May, we're going to recognize $600 or $600. Sorry. Actually, I think that's currency here. Yep. So that's my currency. We're not really talking about costs today, but when you are doing revenue recognition for projects, then you know how much you may be deferring costs for internal services and things like that. So you could also put in anything that's being deferred cost. You could also manually recognize those costs as well. So I'm going to save and close that. And then once again, let's go back to our revenue recognition. Copy this. So we're grabbing this entire contract across both set of books. I don't know if anybody has a guess on what's going to happen here, because this is an interesting one, right? Because there was $39 already recognized. Keep that in mind. Oops, time-based. Yeah, so we put in that $600, so it's going to recognize the difference that it needs to get it up to $600 because of the 39 and change that the system already recognized. So that's an interesting experiment because it's kind of telling you that revenue recognition is something that you can run over and over again. You know, probably not for prior periods that you've closed, I wouldn't advise it. But if you're working on your current month and you realize there's a problem, you can go in and you can sort it out through that source document screen, rerun your revenue recognition, and it's going to do whatever augmentation it needs to do to get it to the right dollar amount based on those changes you've made. So going back to that question, would you ever do an adjustment to your deferred revenue account manually? You know, if it's made an error in how it's done the calculation, you're going to want to correct it through that source document. And then per the comment Catherine made, if your source document is incorrect, you could do a journal voucher with reference to source document. All right, go back into our document items, and I want to show a couple of reports that can be useful. So let's bring up our trustee contract here. I like doing this through here because they've got some reports right out of the box, so I can just sit here and or I don't have to go searching for the report. And if things are working as expected, it should also filter just on the specific contract we're looking for. So I like this sales document detail report. So this report is great because it's kind of showing us exactly what's sitting in deferred revenues, domestic sales, so any of the GL accounts that are associated with that particular contract. So this can be a useful reconciliation report to kind of help you understand, what is the balance on my balance sheet still? How is it made up of? So it started with 6,000. We've drawn down the 166, and that's shown up here in this particular GL account. If we look at our US GAAP books, we'll see a slightly different number because of those adjustments we made. So there's that 560 that was booked. And then, of course, lots of additional fields that you could add to this report. So product is probably quite useful. So now you can see exactly what's happening within the product for each contract, how much has been drawn down, what's left on the balance sheet for each one. So very useful for justifying your balance sheet to your auditors. Another report that is focusing more on the balance sheet. So if we look at our sales accruals for customer contract item, a quick look at that. And I think for some reason it doesn't pop in our sales document. So let me stick that in. So you could do the same thing here if we were to add product. Kind of see exactly what's going on inside your deferred revenue account. And of course, we don't have any cost going on this project, so these are blank, but everything here is just what's happening on your balance sheet. Also keep in mind if you have multiple sets of books, be aware of which books you're running your report for. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to show you. I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna go back to open this up for questions. Let me just pop back into the PowerPoint. So just to summarize some of those key benefits, it removes the manual spreadsheets to recognize revenue each month. Removes manual spreadsheets to reconcile deferrals and accruals. You've got the accrual methods options there to provide you flexibility for your contract requirements. There's flexibility to adapt your method based on certain products, companies, and sets of books. A couple screenshots here, I just showed you those reports. So those are probably the two reports that are quite useful if you're trying to reconcile what's going on in the system. You can see in this one sales document, I actually put the GL account in the column, so you can kind of go side by side per contract or per product to see how it's drawing down. So lots of different ways to pivot your reports. And some tips and suggestions. So useful reports, I've mentioned that. For troubleshooting a specific contract, look to the Cost and Revenue Work Center and the sales document items, search for the specific contract. So I spent quite a bit of time on that. Yeah, so be really aware of that. That sales document items screen inside the Cost and Revenue Work Center, it is just a lifesaver. That's where you're going to go in and figure out exactly what sort of issue you're having with your revenue recognition. Remember, you can run the revenue recognition in multiple ways prior to the final run. So you can run it for a specific contract like we did. That's really useful. If you leave the contract or the document field blank, it's going to run revenue recognition for your entire system. And it might be a little bit muddy when you go into the report to try and understand. So feel free to target in on a specific document to understand what's happening. And then also, as important, make sure you're running it in test mode so that you don't trigger an actual journal entry and have something that you don't want in the system. Remember, you can override the accrual method in the sales document, so we spent quite a bit of time on that. So on a contract by contract basis, you could decide to do a different method, and you could also do it halfway through the life of the contract. Before running an actual non-test Rev Rec, double check your parameters carefully. Running it in the wrong period can create unexpected results. Yeah, so if you do run revenue recognition, in period 6 and period 5, it's going to do a catch up for you. It's going to, overstate, and then you might be in a situation where it's a little bit tricky to sort that out. So just be really careful that you're double checking, especially the date parameters when you're running that job, especially in the non-test mode. Be sure to check the error and warning messages. So we didn't have any error or warning messages come up, but you saw that tab. I showed it to you quickly. So if, for example, there's a contract where it can't determine the accrual method, that's the sort of thing that'll show up in the warning screen, and then you can address that issue and then rerun the job. And then, yeah, we already talked about this. So avoid making adjustments directly to the revenue recognition accounts, both the balance sheet and the P&L, through a journal voucher. You should be able to make any necessary changes through the sales document screen or through a sales document journal voucher, but that would be the prescribed way to do that. So I've kind of reached the end of what I wanted to show you. We have enough time to take a few more questions if people have. It'll just give people a minute and see if any more questions or comments show up in the chat. Okay, looks like no more questions are coming up. So hopefully this gives you, what you need to explore your system. Revenue recognition can be turned on in a test environment. Revenue recognition, I didn't really get into talking about how encompassing it is, so it does impact your entire system. So you definitely want to be very thoughtful about how you deploy it, because it's not just going to impact contracts. So if you do have any questions on getting it configured in your system, feel free to reach out to your VistaView rep and we'll help you get that set up. So I don't think there's any other questions coming through. So Sabine, I'll turn it back to you to close this off.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for a great Q&A Cafe, and thank you to everyone who attended our session today. If you have any other questions, please reach out to us, like Alex said, at vistaviewsolutions.com, and be sure to check out our resource library on our website. We also have our weekly Brain Booster videos that do more of a deep dive into specialized topics for both Business One and ByDesign. We look forward to seeing you again in the next Q&A Cafe in August. Thank you.